Well, it's not very transparent, right? First of all, don't waste money like crazy. And second of all, you owe taxpayers transparency. We pay the bills. We deserve to know what you're spending our money on.
Justin Trudeau has once again been caught with his pants down. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation revealed yesterday on April 10 that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his delegation spent $190,000 of taxpayers' money on airline food alone during a tour of the Indo-Pacific region last fall. A total bill for the 6-day trip amounted to nearly $2 million of taxpayer money. This had to his numerous other overpriced trips, such as the 6,000 hotel room he booked for the funeral of the Queen in London.
Prime Minister spent $6,000 for one hotel room per night in London, and then spent that evening singing up a storm and partying in that fancy hotel lobby. It was really an analogy for his whole government.
Mr. Trudeau should be more concerned about the reality of Canadians who are struggling with the cost of living. Mortgage rates are destroying families, inflation is rising, there is a housing crisis, an explosion in food bank usage, and crime rates are on the rise. Franco Terrazzano, who works for the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, is well known for exposing Trudeau expenses and hypocrisy. Today, he is explaining the full document they received.
Well, taxpayers are getting soaked again, right? It seems like the government is flying all around the world, billing taxpayers for their extravagant trips. This time, last September, Trudeau went on a 6-day trip to the Indo-Pacific region. It cost taxpayers $2 million for a 6-day trip, including $200,000 spent on airplane food. $200,000 spent on airplane food, okay? You know, for that cost, I mean, that's about the average family's grocery bill for almost 2 decades that the government is spending on airplane food. Okay, so you have Canadians who are struggling at home just to afford the necessities like groceries, and our government is billing taxpayers for $200,000 on airplane food for a 6-day trip.
So it's not the first scandal that Justin Trudeau is involved with, and it seems that he doesn't really care about it. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a big problem, right? Because this isn't a one-off situation here, right? Like, let's look at all the different times, okay? First of all, you had Trudeau during the Queen's funeral in London stay in a $6,000 per night hotel room and then bill struggling taxpayers back home. Okay, there was the time that Trudeau went to a star-studded 2-day anti-poverty summit in Manhattan and billed taxpayers for $61,000 worth of hotel rooms. Okay, and then there's the Governor General. Her week-long trip to the Middle East cost taxpayers more than $1 million, $100,000 on airplane food. Or the Governor General's trip to Iceland for 4 days, okay? That one cost hundreds of thousands of bucks, including $71,000 on limo services, when the hotel was like a 10-minute walk away from the main conference center. So time and again, we see our government going to these extravagant conferences all around the world and billing taxpayers for a crazy amount of money when Canadians are struggling back home.
What we should do for the future for avoiding a government to spend as much as that?
Well, this is on the politicians and the bureaucrats, right? So we elect our politicians to look over the public purse, not to shower themselves in these expensive trips all around the world. But then also, too, we need the government bureaucrats who are working on these trips to be held accountable, right? Because we just had this like dog and pony show over the Governor General's very extravagant international trips. You had these top government officials saying, we're sorry, we'll do better. Well, they're not doing better, right? They spent $100,000 on the Governor General's trip to the Middle East, $100,000 on airplane food. Then they apologized and said they would do better. And now we find out they're doing worse because the airplane food bill doubled from $100,000, which was already crazy, to now $200,000 for Trudeau's recent trip. And that's just airplane food alone, right? Airplane food alone, $200,000 to his trip last year to the Indo-Pacific region.
Can you explain a little bit? Is it hard to get all those information?
Well, you know, this isn't even publicly available. We had to file access to information requests at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation just to get the receipts. And you know what's almost worse than them spending this crazy amount of money? They spend this crazy amount of money, and in some instances, they try to hide it. Remember when Mr. Trudeau stayed in the $6,000 per night hotel room? Well, it took months for him to admit that it was him who stayed in it. We had to file an access to information request, then we got it back redacted, so we had to launch a legal challenge to force Trudeau to fess up with Canadians. So not only are they wasting your money going to these trips abroad, but then in some instances, they're trying to hide it.
Go over rebelfieldreport.com to support and encourage our independent journalism, and you can donate what you can, so every donation counts. So please go over rebelfieldreport.com.